Hello and welcome to Eldritch Extras.
Hello. Oh,
How you doing, Mike?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm very good. Yes. It's
So
a lovely summer's day.
what's going on?
Well, I'm back from Gen Con. Should I
Oh,
mention that?
well, you have mentioned it
I
now,
have
so it's a
mentioned
bit
it.
late. I mean, I guess the obvious question is, how was Gen Con?
Gen Con was good.
Well, I think we've got all the bases there then, so that's marvelous.
Do you
So,
need to hear more? No, it
go
was a
on
good
then.
time.
Tell us a little bit more.
Uh,
What did you actually spend most of your time doing?
what did I spend? I don't know, just hanging out and chatting with people, really. I played a few games. What did I play? A handful of games.
Did you run any games?
Yep, I ran two games. I ran Full Fathom 5 with U2 Can Cthulhu with Bob Geis and his crew for 7 players with, myself and 4 other GMs from his team. Not really GMs, but like people sort of helping play the NPCs. So that was
Right.
a novel experience.
Did that, I haven't normally done that kind of thing in the past. So how was that kind of, I always have the fear that if you've got a helper, another keeper, and you give them an NPC, my kind of internal fear is that they're going to say something wrong or give something away or not give a clue away. Do you kind of have the same kind of reservations or did it kind of go fine?
I think in some other scenarios I might have had that concern, but with this one, it was just kind of pushing the envelope and letting them have free reign, really. And at one point we did split the group. So Bob took half the crew. So we had 2 whaling ships, 2 whaling boats, like the small whaling boats out on the sea. And I took one and Bob took the others in a different room. And then we reconvened together. And that was kind of fun.
Yeah.
And yeah, just having them, I would just maybe just whisper an instruction to them, and then they'd be on their brief, and they'd just hit it. It was great.
Was your kind of whispered instructions along the lines of kill them now? Was that kind of?
It was kind of, you need to get this guy or whatever, and they'd provoke it, and they kind of knew the characters well, the NPCs they were playing, and they just fell into it. It was it was great. It was good.
Yeah, that sounds really good. So was it kind of very table based? It has a sound that it kind of people were getting up and kind of LARPing to some degree.
There was a bit of that. I mean, we had 7 players. They were mostly sat at the table. But at times, yeah, I'd call them over and we'd get up, and there was a bit of what one might call LARPing going on. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. Did you get to play in a game?
I want to say I did, but I can't think what it was. Do you know? I'm not sure I did. I think I just GM'd.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And you can't talk about Gen Con without talking about the trade hall. So, did you have a wander of the trade hall? Past 5 minutes wandering around and
I did
pick anything up that that attracted your eye.
Yeah, it's a bit like when you get a book that I find I'm glazing over with it. Sometimes I just I don't think it's called speed reading, but I just start scanning through it. And after a bit, I find a passage that suddenly I'm reading it now. I'm reading this now, and I'm actually taking this in again. So, yeah, because there are some books that are just a bit dry, and I'll just kind of skim through a bit. And there's a bit like that with the Gen Con Hall. I just start walking, and then I see something that catches my eye, and then I stop and look at it. So that happened with the Everdell store, Everdell, the board game, because I wanted to ask the guy about the various expansions, because I've looked at the expansions online and just been baffled by them.
So can I just stop you there then? So
yeah.
Everdell, is that a game you already own the base set of, or you want to buy? Or
Yeah, no, I own the base set, and it's one of our favorite board games for the family. You get like the Evertree. It's like a 3-dimensional wood cardboard tree that you put together, just simply slots together. And then there's loads of animals. Like you get an animal, so there's the miner mole, and then there's a location with the miner mole. You get the mine. There's the post office, and I think it's maybe the owl or something like that goes. So you got all these animal characters who are sort of anthropomorphized animals. and their locations, and you create your own little town with these things, but you can only have 15 cards. There's economies and so on. It's not like a simple game, but it's not like mega complex. But I struggle to sort of figure out a winning strategy with this game. So I'm always a bit at sea with it. But I just love the look of it and the feel of it and the playing of it and creating your own little town. And there are various expansions that, add to that. So there's like an underwater one, and there's various things that kind of add to the board. So I was looking at what expansions were available.
Right. Okay. I can't say I've played it yet, and I can't. I kind of got a picture of the cover of the box, but I can't say I've seen it being played. So I'm not. You mentioned cards, or is it primarily a card game, or is there? You mentioned a tree. There's a cardboard tree in the middle of the table. Do you kind of have to throw fruit to knock the squirrel out the tree, or what?
Well, the tree is just a prop, really. So there are objectives for the game, and each game you draw cards for what the objectives are, and those cards, some of those, there's positions on the little tree for some of those cards to sit. Like there's there's 2 platforms on the tree. Right. And you go through seasons, and in each season you'll draw some more of your little playing pieces from the tree. So it's kind of like a deck holder almost, the resource manager.
Yeah.
And there, like I said, there's about 4 or 5 expansions, and the guy's like, you could get this expansion, or you could get this expansion, or you could just buy this box.
Massive box with them all in it. Yeah.
It's freaking huge. And it's about 300 quid or something. Yeah. And I'm like, I'm not even sure I could fit that in my suitcase, man. It's just just huge. But a beautifully produced game, fun to play, and full of, if you like woodland animals and gaming,
Sure. Well, I mean, it doesn't sound. I mean, obviously, it's a completely different game, but obviously, I introduced you to Parks last night, didn't I? And, which has got seasons and wildlife, little tokens and things like that. So not a million miles away. I'm a big fan of Parks. I really, really enjoy it. I think the production values on the game are really high, and it's very tactile and beautiful artwork of all the kind of the US national parks and so on. I mean, you first played it for the first time last night. So did you enjoy that?
I did. I thought, it made me kind of think I'd like to get this, because when I play a game, I'm partly looking, is it a fun game to play? Is it too complicated? Because I've played some board games that just make my head hurt, and I'm not really into that. But also, does it have a nice, dressing to it?
Yeah.
So like the parks, I love the parks. You could have that game and it just be abstract with just points and symbols, right? With no, but the fact they've put the parks as a sort of set dressing on top of it, it just gives it a lovely feel. And the same with the woodland animals one, right? It wouldn't have to be animals. It could just be anything you could use for it. But I think when there's a gel between those things, between the the mechanics and the fiction, I guess. So like we also like Ticket to Ride, and there are various boards of Ticket to Ride, and some of them seem to emulate the feel of the place where the board is set. So like the Old West one, like the Wild West one, you all start at different locations, and you can only build from that location. So it's ages before you meet anyone else, and you just feel like.
Yeah, I've not played the Wild West version, so that's really interesting. Yeah.
You get the feeling that you're in a massive landscape that there aren't many people around, and somehow emulates that. The really small one, the New York one, I think rather than trains, you're in taxis, and it plays in about 20 minutes, and it feels frenetic and busy.
Okay. Yeah.
So somehow that the setting and the mechanics seem to mesh together really well, and I like that.
I guess another example of that, which I think is pretty successful, is I quite enjoy Pandemic. The kind of original version.
Mm.
And then they brought out the Cthulhu Pandemic, which is, I think, all set in Arkham. It's been a while since I played it. But you're basically, rather than multiplying kind of bacteria, you're multiplying cultists as the cultists take over town, and you're trying to, level them out. And again, I think that translates pretty well, because you're playing effectively the same game, but there is a lot of local tailoring to the kind of the mythos in that, so you kind of get the feel, and again, it's quite attractively done, and it just feels a little different to the base game, and much more focused, because you're dealing with one town rather than the world with Pandemic. But yeah, I think when games do that well, it does come across, and it makes them attractive.
And I think that's the third aspect maybe you touched on there is the physical feel of the things, and how well the visual and physical feel of the pieces. Like you got that 3-dimensional tree. You don't need that, in Everdell, but it's a really nice addition. It just catches the eye, and I don't know, just visually and physically appealing in the game. And the pieces, like you're playing pieces, you've got little wooden squirrels or little wooden hedgehogs and things just as playing pieces, and they're just nice to. I just like those. Like I've said before, in like my first game of D&D, we had little painted miniatures, and there was weird shaped dice, and there was a map, and there was a DM screen, just loads of lovely things on the table that really appealed to me.
I mean, that's exactly the same as my kind of first roleplay experience. It was the miniatures that captivated me. It was that it really gave me a focus in the first hour of the game to kind of understand what was going on, so it really helped. And again, going back to what you just said, like Wingspan. I mean, I don't know about you, but the different coloured eggs and really cool. I want more eggs because they just look cool. And, and that's another game that's kind of really gone to town in terms of presentation. Of course, not only with the artwork, with the card holder boxes and the nesting box, the dice roller. All these things are really unnecessary, but they really add to the feel of the game, and they kind of keep you in the kind of mindset that is, what the game is about. And I think it's done very well.
That dice tower in Wingspan is genius. I think dice towers in general, I could take them or leave them.
Take them or leave them. Yeah.
But in Wingspan, it's setting and not really mechanics, but a thing in the game. It's a bird feeder. It's built to look like a bird feeder, but also you roll the dice into it, and that's the store of dice. And when you take them out of it, it means something mechanically in the game. That you've taken them out and you take it. So it's a really good, because I think tracking those things without that would be quite difficult, because you'd need somewhere, are those the dice we're using, or are those the dice we spend?
Yeah, just differentiate between used and unused dice and all that kind of thing. It just helps. It helps speed
really
the game up, doesn't it? In that way, you don't get into 100%. Arguments about, that's already been rolled, kind of thing.
Yeah. And
it's very easy to do in a board game. Let's just look at Monopoly or something like that. Where
So you asked about how my experience was of the game last night. We played this game online, so we played it on Board Game Arena, and it was the first time I'd played it. And I'd say I enjoyed playing it, but it almost felt to me like I was playing a solo game.
Yeah.
With two other people, because I was very conscious of what I was doing, but I wasn't very conscious of what you guys were doing, because partly you were more proficient with the game, so you just knew what to do when it came to your turns, but you would do things and I'd be like, I don't really know what they did then.
No, absolutely. I think that is one of the kind of depends how you look at it, but the potential downside of that kind of online board game experience. It's the same for, it's a different thing, but it's the same for online role playing, isn't it? You get the experience and you have a good game and you can enjoy it, but you lose something in the translation. That even in a role playing game, it's just that kind of social aspect around the table, and sometimes and just that kind of being engaged, because it's I find very easy to get switched off playing an online game if you're not currently doing something and you're watching other people, which is all fine, but waiting for your turn. But it's much easier to be disengaged, whereas around the table, you're kind of there, and so you are engaged much more easily. So yeah, I get that you can feel like you're playing it on your own, but I think also when you're learning a game, you are focused on what you're doing rather than anyone else. I think even in a physical version of the game, you might be a bit more aware of the other people, but you're still trying to focus on just doing it right, aren't you? And as you build your awareness of how to actually play the game, you start then thinking, okay, what is everyone else doing? Why do they keep winning? And watching what they do, and that builds into your play, doesn't it? I guess.
But like I could see like the points, and like Pender suddenly shot up 5 points, and I'm like, oh, how did you do that? And he's like, oh, I just visited that park. And I'm like, oh, okay, so that park's gone now. So in a physical game, I'd see him take the card off the table. More
obvious.
And it's just I guess more clear to me. But but no, it was good. I mean, I enjoyed the game, and I think I would look to buy a copy.
Yeah, well, I recommend it definitely. I think it's I really enjoy it. So yeah, but anyway, so we're talking about board games and stuff. Why don't we talk about favorite settings? Because we've talked about a setting, we've talked about woodland and woodland animals, with Wingspan and what's it called, Everwood or something,
Everdell
and Parks, which are all nature-based games. So clearly that's something we both like. But more broadly, though, in terms of maybe in terms of films and role playing specifically, are there any settings that kind of draw you? Because I don't recall you ever kind of going, let's play Woodland the RPG, whereas in a board game you're drawn to that. In an RPG, are you drawn to kind of like wanting to play anthropomorphic animals?
No, that kind of puts, I mean, I don't want to like put it down, but it's not really for me. I feel I don't really feel drawn to that. I mean, there's a game where you play dogs in D&D. I can't remember what it's called now. But I'm like, I don't know. Maybe if I played it, I'd really enjoy it, but it doesn't appeal to me on the surface. But then again, superheroes don't really appeal to me, but I've played a few champions back in the day and so on, and actually playing it I really enjoyed it, but more so than I enjoy, like, because I'm not like a big fan of comics.
You're not
Marvel and so on.
Superhero fan, because every time I come back from a superhero film, have you? I just saw this. Have you? I stop myself now by going, oh no, of course you've not wanted to watch it. You hate superhero films.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, anyway.
Well, that maybe is a topic for another time. Why don't you like superhero films? But I think,
that's a string of topics why I hate.
What do you? You should just call this podcast "What Paul Doesn't Like Today." So yeah, absolutely. Well, what do you like in terms of settings?
Okay.
What about what is if you have to pull out some settings from books or role playing games, what would you say? If I see that, I'm interested, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think generally I'm not drawn. Well, I'm going to probably anything I say, I'm probably going to then contradict in the next sentence, but I'm probably not drawn to settings that involve a really hyper involved. But then again, if they come from fiction that I'm familiar with, so I guess I like settings that are based on external fiction, such as like Middle Earth, Star Wars, things like that. Whereas if the setting is purely written for role-playing games, I don't know, I generally don't get so much into that. And so I kind of like the external angle.
Yeah, you like the thing is, what you're saying, you're already invested. Having read, Lord of the Rings, you've got a pretty good idea about Middle Earth. Therefore, playing a Middle Earth role-playing game, you're kind of halfway there already. There's not a lot. You only need to learn the mechanics almost. You don't need to learn the setting. Whereas something that's been purposely built for a game, you've got to learn two things really: not only the mechanics potentially, but the settings, rules, and what it is. So that could be a potential barrier, I guess, for some.
If it's a role playing game, if it's a fantasy game, I'd rather just like start off with generic fantasy almost and create our own world through it at the table, kind of just emergent setting is probably my favorite for that sort of thing. Sometimes I feel that can be a bit of a restriction. I mean, I remember, for example, Getting Over the Edge. Great setting, but I really tried to play it by the book. So I think this is a good example, because I really tried to play it by the book and like catalogued everything that was sort of listed down for Alamaja, all the places and the factions and so on. But looking through that book, and that to me was almost a restriction, playing it like that. But looking through that book, I really feel like they just played the game, improvised stuff, made the stuff up as they went along, and then wrote it all down and published it. And I think they had tremendous fun creating that setting. And I think that's what anybody else should do. Just get that game, scrub it back to the bare bones and just go wild and create your own setting and your own factions and your own, weird things, and take inspiration
to you,
from,
I guess, in that that kind of makes a lot of sense. I mean, something that I would say, well, it's not the same, but similar in terms of a created setting for a game is Slay Industries. But I think it's different in that it's possibly simpler in terms of what there is than Over the Edge, because Over the Edge, there's a lot going on, isn't there, in that book? There's a lot of different things and moving parts potentially you could want to really immerse yourself in, and that's cool. Slay Industries, it's a little bit more simple. It's it's straightforward. You're employed to undertake these missions, and that's all you need to know, really. And other than the world is as it is, and you can actually reveal that in emergent play, although you're kind of going off a brief that's a set background. But there's a lot of flexibility in that, I think, and so you're focusing it. You only really got to understand very few core concepts of the setting, and again, it's one of the things you kind of love it, or it doesn't. It just runs off you. But I mean, I found it was really engaging and so forth, and I found it very easy to convey the setting to a group of players who had no idea about the setting, because I think that's the acid test, isn't it? Whether you might get enthused about a creative setting when you get into the rule book and you read all the background and whatnot, and you get all excited and want to run it, but then you've got to translate that enthusiasm and knowledge on the table to a bunch of people that haven't read the rule book and have got no idea what this setting is. And again, sometimes a lighter touch, or being able to kind of guide that presentation when you start the game by saying, just, here are the few things you need to focus on. Don't worry about the rest. The rest can develop as you go into it. I think it helps in that way.
Yeah, I mean, they refer to them as touchstones, right? Just kind of key things that you can sort of mention that will get people's imagination going, and you're all on the same page.
Yeah.
I think, I always think this is one of the struggles with sci-fi, because sci-fi, you say, oh, we're playing a sci-fi game. And it's like, if you say we're playing a fantasy game, there's different types of fantasy, and your fantasy might be radically different. But in general, we know what we mean by a fantasy, whereas sci-fi, it could be anything.
So, well, sci-fi, I mean, the example I always go is, is it Star Trek or Star Wars? Because that's massively different kind of style of games and, styles of setting, let alone adding in, the variations between that, whether it's, kind of gritty kind of aliens, ashtrays in space, which again is its own thing, or to some kind of gleaming kind of, bright future, or is it a dark and gritty and so forth. So there's so many permutations, and when you just say sci-fi, it doesn't really mean anything, does it?
So I guess it's like you want to be able to communicate to your players really quickly what the setting is and all get on the same page. So like Rivers of London, for example, I mean, that's one that we've both worked on, and I just kind of say, well, it's urban fantasy, it's modern day, you're in London. If you're setting it in London, that's the default, and magic is returning to the world, and that's pretty much. I don't know. Do you need to say more? Maybe.
Well, I mean, it follows the same kind of pattern as Cthulhu, doesn't it? Call of Cthulhu is in that you're setting it in a relative model of the real world, be it modern day or 1920s or whenever. So there's a common, I mean, this is what we're talking about. There's a common frame of reference that everyone has.
Yes.
So if you say we are starting off in a speakeasy in 1920s Chicago, everyone, even if they know nothing really about the 1920s, has got a picture of that in their head just from, exposure to films, books, life in general. And so you've got a common framework which you can then build upon. And as we've often said, with people being worried about being authentic in terms of their presentation of a historical period, is kind of, well, just be consistent and don't worry too much about it. If you get something really wrong, just retrofit it. But most of the time, it's small fry stuff that you really don't need to worry about. Focus on the story that the players are engaged with, and that's what will carry you through and have a good time.
So your go-to there was Slay Industries. So I'm a player sat at your table. Right, I've never heard of this game. What are we doing now? I'm putting you on the spot.
Slay Industries off the top of my head to you. Oh, that's great. Thanks for that. Yeah, no worries.
No, you don't have to. But I mean, is it something simple that you could sum up?
I mean, yeah, I would say that it's set on a planet called Mort, and it's set in a kind of a far future, where there is one company that runs everything, and it's the kind of Slay Industries is owns everything. They are the government, they are the business. Even businesses with different names are sub companies of Slay Industries. So everything is a corporate nightmare, if you imagine. It's just kind of dystopia, and that's the setting. But basically, all you need to know about the place you're in is the environment has been wrecked, by mining the resources of the planet. It rains constantly, sometimes acid rain, so on, and all the population are kind of condensed into this mega city of Mort, which works on different levels. So you have above ground where relatively, the weller off people live, and below ground, many sub levels. And the further you go down, the poorer, the worse, the more dangerous it gets. And you are agents employed by Slay Industries as troubleshooters. So you could end up going anywhere and doing any kind of mission, from rescuing somebody from being kidnapped to doing security duty on some pop stars to anything in between. That's your setting. And of course, clearly beyond the mega city and the kind of irradiated and desolate wastelands that are around are things you don't want to come across. And those things sometimes enter the city. And again, as troubleshooters, you're the first people who are going to get called on to deal with them.
That's great. I like that, because you told me also, you didn't just tell me about the setting, you told me what I'm going to likely be doing.
That's the key, isn't it? It's really,
I think so, yeah.
What am I actually doing in this game? Yeah.
Because you can get this big setting and then you're like, and what do I do?
Yeah.
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 But I get the feel like so in my head, I'm hearing Blade Runner meets 1984 meets Paranoia, the role-playing game.
Kinda, yeah, you wouldn't be far wrong. Yeah.
So I think that I feel on board with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like say I imagine I know nothing about Tolkien and Middle Earth. Yeah, not watched the films, not read the books. Yeah, and you rock up with the One Ring role playing game. Yeah, and I go, what's this? How would you sell that? I don't know. I'm just obviously throwing this back at you now.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, okay. The ball's in my court. Wow. So you want me to sum up Tolkien in? I
mean, I've chosen something you actually know pretty well. So I mean,
Yeah, but it's like summarizing Proust. Okay, so it's a fantasy game. I would probably, say, have you played Dungeons and Dragons? That would probably be, something that falls out of my mouth at some point.
Yeah, that's the game you use a board with, isn't it? You have that cardboard tree in the middle. It gives you resources. That's the one, isn't it?
So it's a fantasy land. It's some elements of sword and sorcery, but there's a lot of rural elements, and you might be hobbits, like little people, or you might be elves or dwarves that live in the mountains and mine gold and mithril. There are various kingdoms across the land, and your characters, you might be going on just minor quests to help some friends, or you might be going on a quest into the mines of Moria below the mountains, or you might be going on a quest to slay a dragon, even.
Well, that sounds a bit more interesting than minor quests. I have to say, can we not do the minor quests? Because that sounds a bit dull. Can we go and slay dragons and steal dwarven gold?
Yes, you can.
Okay,
I'm in. That's
then.
how it started.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's not an easy.
It's not an easy thing at all. No.
Undersell, but it's not an easy thing introducing a setting to people who have no idea about it. And obviously, that's just being at the table as the GM, let alone producing, writing that in a book to sell the setting. That's another element in terms of the kind of things that we've done in the past. So it's you've got to think clearly, because it's so easy to overcomplicate something very quickly and immediately put people off, isn't it? That's the thing. What about so you talked about fantasy a little bit. What about non-fantasy settings? Are there any, sci-fi you talked about, and obviously Middle Earth we know you got an interest in, but is there any other kind of thing? What anything else that kind of jumps out at you as kind of, if I'm not playing fantasy or sci-fi, what is my go-to setting?
Well, I mean, just modern day is a great setting, I think. So the real world, or what appears to be the real world. So many horror movies, and not just horror movies, but thrillers and things like that we enjoy. It starts off. I like starting off just feeling like I'm in the real world, I guess. That could be like Boardwalk Empire. It could be, oh crikey, what's the
the thing with Arnold Schwarzenegger in?
The cop one that had like the Yellow King and so on references.
Oh, a True Detective,
things like that. So I think the real world is rich because everybody knows it. So you can just sort of say, I guess I'm lazy and I can just say, oh, it's the real world, and people, you just give them a time and a place and a job and you're away. Well, but then obviously there's more under the surface.
There is, but I think, other than a common frame of reference, which I think we both agree on is attractive because it's very accessible. If you're selling things in the real world, be it 1920s or now or whenever, there's a common understanding of how it works, not just what it is, but how it works. So we all understand that if you say that guy in the corner is pointing a gun at you, you know what that means. Whereas you say, oh, this guy's got this strange kind of orange ball in his hand and he's kind of waving it at you. You've no idea that it could be a threat, could be him doing a magic trick. And so instantly you've got to now, add an added layer of detail to say, oh, well, in the game world, you'd know that orange ball is actually this laser weapon and it could kill you. And so, but you've now spent another 5 minutes explaining that when you could have just said he's got a gun and he's pointing at you. So there's that common understanding of how the world works, which can obviously be replicated in the mechanics. And, obviously many games do it in different ways, but ultimately a mechanic is, does it work or not? So it's easy to then kind of assimilate the rules in that way sometimes, rather than having to learn everything from scratch. You're only learning portions of the game in a sense, and that's attractive to me because it makes life easier, and it also allows for sometimes more player input, because they have a common understanding of the world. So you're able to kind of use your players as a resource. So, we've had this in games, we've talked about before in terms of running a con game, and you mentioned something, I can't think of anything specific now, but let's just say, oh, there's a there's a Model T Ford, yeah, and it's got 4 doors, and so the 4 of your characters can all get in straight away and escape from the Shoggoth. Whereas, and somebody on the table go, actually, Model T's only had 2 doors, so actually it might take more than a round for the Shoggoth to go in. And you go, actually, that's pretty good, because that's actually raises attention. And you go, okay, yeah, sorry, my mistake. It's 2 doors. So who's getting in first, and which 2 of you are going to have to kind of dodge the Shoggoth for a round before you can get in the car? Suddenly, that's actually helped the game. So I'm just using that as an example, but often players can throw in some knowledge that they have into a real world type setting that really helps the game, and that's great. Obviously, it shouldn't all just necessarily be the keeper or the GM gurgitating all they know all the time. Players build in their knowledge too. It becomes it's a group story, isn't it? At the end of the day,
it is, and I think we don't do that so much in fantasy or sci-fi games, but I think we should, as players, like throw things in. So you're going out to your, I don't know, some sci-fi hover ship, like, and but you could have the same thing. Your player sort of says, "Oh, there's only 2 seats in that." Well, it's only exists in our imagination.
Yeah,
but maybe the player throws in some spanner in the works, or which adds to the fiction. And it's not drawn from real world stuff like your Model T Ford thing, but I think it's always good when it's not just the GM describing the world. It can come from the players a bit as well.
Well, yeah, because and that just by the fact of them doing that and that being communally accepted now as part of the game world, it helps player investment and engagement. Yeah,
totally.
At the end of the day, and that's what we want. We want people to be engaged in the game and to get the most out of it. So where you're kind of, going back a few years when I was younger, and probably you'd have the same experience. Back in the day, you were a player in some game in some fantasy world or whatever it would be, and if you tried to suggest kind of having an input into the setting, you were told, no, it doesn't work like that.
Overruled. Yeah.
Overruled. Keep the GM would be, no. It doesn't work like that. You don't understand. Let me explain. And then you'd have an hour of them talking at you, telling you how the game world and your motivation for wanting to remain and come back over, draining away down as you sit at the table.
But this conversation where you're asking me about favorite settings reminds me of playing Primetime Adventures, where you start off and it's like pitches for a TV show, and that's what you're going to play in the game. And often the first conversation around the table was, oh, what setting should we have? And I was never really that bothered. I like the story and the characters and like the twists of story, but it's like a bit like when I'm writing a scenario, I don't start with the setting, or at least I maybe have a setting, but then partway down the road, I'll totally change the setting because I'm not really that tied to setting, I think.
Yeah, that's great. Having played Primetime, I was never bothered about the setting either. And it always seemed to me there's always one person in the group who has a setting they really want to do.
Yeah.
And they will kind of push that through, and everyone kind of finally goes, oh yeah, we'll do that then. That sounds great.
Yeah.
And so, and that always seemed to be the case in my, and sometimes I think I wasn't that interested in, but I kind of went along with it. Because I think what you're saying is ultimately role-playing games are not about setting, because you don't walk away necessarily going, that if you see what I'm trying to say is ultimately in terms of the game experience, the setting is atmosphere, it is backdrop, it can influence things, obviously, but actually what I don't remember anyone ever coming to me and telling me about their game and telling me about the setting. What everyone does is tell me what their characters did or what happened to them. Yeah. And obviously the setting plays a component in that, but it's not the key component. It's not what, but that time we were on the Nostromo, and the Nostromo is such an interesting ship in the game, and all these dark corridors. No, we were on the ship, and this alien was coming out and eating us, and that's what people are talking about. That's what they remember, and the setting, as I keep saying, is important. Don't get me wrong, but it's not what makes a role-playing game a role-playing game. It's the action, it's the story, it's the communal story, and what happens in that setting. That's actually what makes us play the game. I don't turn up for a role-playing game just because of the setting. It's because the setting informs what might happen, and so that does play a role. Don't get me wrong, but
it's an important element. But I think we've seen, working with other people on developing scenarios and so on, how some people do start from setting, and that's really what drives their passion for the thing, and that's great, because I think different people latch on to different things. And whilst that may not, I agree with what you just said, I think there are some people, whilst it might not be what they recount afterwards about the game, if you ask them what they like about RPGs, the first thing they might say is, "Oh, I really love like the Dark Sun setting for D&D."
Oh, sure, no,
I'm they're really passionate about that
not
thing.
The case. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that's the case.
No, I get what you're saying.
I think setting is a big draw, and a real reason why certainly a large percentage of people are drawn to a game just because of the setting. If somebody says we're going to put out a new game of, I don't know, Babylon 5. I'm a big Babylon 5 fan, so I would be interested in that alone. I don't know nothing about the game, so I would, so I know it's a draw and it's important. I'm just talking about the actual game experience. Totally. Yeah. But yeah.
So you mentioned Slay. What's one more before we wrap up? What would be your next go-to for best settings?
Well, is it settings that actually exist, or settings that are in my head, as in?
It's good if somebody else has heard of it, Mike.
So, well, I mean, this is a setting someone's heard of, and there are games kind of based around the concept. So I'm just going to say folk horror, yeah,
right.
So I'm just going to say kind of, rather than urban fantasy or urban horror, folk horror, which is tends to be more countryside based, let's say, but it can be urban, but that kind of sense of the land being somehow involved, to whatever degree, in terms of its history or the reality of the land. And I guess what I'm talking, and obviously, rivers and liminal and that draw on some of these kind of concepts clearly. But that kind of meshing of folklore and the kind of the concept of hauntology and a misremembered past that never was, and all that kind of stuff, that has always intrigued me, and so I'm interested. I think some games do it very well, some games not quite as well, but that kind of concept is good. I mean, obviously I like it because it's an easy kind of genre to also slip into the game that I like best, which is Call of Cthulhu, obviously. And it's an easy way to do that, but that is a kind of a setting. I like that kind of getting out the city. Whereas in fantasy, I'm less interested in getting out of the city. I'm more interested in what's going on in the city or below it. That's more my jam. But in a kind of a real world style game, getting out the city and exploring the moors and the strange stone monoliths and the fairy rings and so forth, that's more interesting to me.
So, because you like Midsummer.
I'm not a fan of Midsummer. I prefer The Wicker Man.
I know you are.
But I mean, I'm not opposed to Midsummer.
Yeah,
but I mean, I prefer Hereditary to Midsummer, to be honest. I think that was a tight film, personally. But there you go. There you are.
Okay. Well, shall we wrap it up there?
We could wrap it up there, because no one wants listeners to go on and on and on, do they?
No,
that's just crazy.
Lord, no.
So what do we need to remind people to do, Paul?
Well, we would like to ask you, dear listeners and viewers, because this is on YouTube and it's on audio podcast. We'd like to ask you to share this with your friends and tell people about Eldritch Stories and Eldritch Extras. And you can find our website, eldritchstories.com.
Marvelous. So please come along and let other people know. So Okay, well, there's nothing else to say other than what have we got to do, Paul?
Keep it Eldritch.